This episode of the Citadel Cafe is brought to you by listeners like you. Visit patreon.com/the Citadel Cafe to find out how you can become a patron and help make this show possible. This is the Citadel Cafe, episode number 346 for Friday, January 24th, 2020. My name is Joel Duggan, and the Citadel Cafe is where my friends and I hang out to talk about the geeky stuff that we are into. And boy, do we have a geeky show for you today. Joining me this week is my co-host from the Spawn Chunks, Johnny. You may know him better as Pixlriffs on YouTube and Twitch, or photos of lovely garden foxes on Instagram. Welcome back to the Citadel Cafe, my friend.
Hello, it's good to be here. You may know me from Joel's emotes of those lovely garden foxes because you've been doing a little bit of work for me on Twitch lately. The emotes have been going down a storm. I want to thank you for that here at the top of the show because, yeah, I'm really, really happy with the whole thing. Joel will no doubt drop all sorts of links and chat about his work, his portfolio, his illustration stuff. I have heard the links often. I've heard the plugs several times over and multiple times per week, sometimes as I edit the Spawn Chunks, but I cannot recommend highly enough that this man is doing great work, and you can watch Joel do some of the emote design for me over on his Twitch as well. So,
thanks, man. I really appreciate that, and I appreciate the work because it's really fun. Like as my career has moved forward, I've done a lot of design work in the last 10 years compared to cartoon and illustration. That just generally tends to pay better. There is more of it. A lot of the work that I was doing in cartooning early in my career was done at studios, and so all that stuff is generally done in-house. They don't reach out a lot for freelancers. Every once in a while you'll get like a website design or a logo design where someone's like, oh, we're a board game company, we want a cartoony logo. But more often than not, I'm doing some very businessy, very kind of standard practice graphic design logos and things. Not that I don't like that, I still enjoy that process, but it means that I'm drawing stuff a little bit less. Since I started working with you on the Spawn Chunks and doing more Minecraft content, Minecraft being very cartoony in nature and already establishing kind of like a cartoon design, like so many YouTubers and Twitch streamers that deal with Minecraft have cartoon stuff in the periphery. Like that's just their characters or whatever is drawing. That just tends to be how it's done. And so when you're a cartoonist and people come to you for this kind of thing, it's really, really fun because I get to flex what I would consider my strength as a designer. I'm definitely still a cartoonist at heart. It's something that I can get at quite easily, and I don't say that lightly. It's comes from 20 years of experience, but it's something that is fun. It's a fun way to work, and I still have the added challenge of trying to draw images that are 112 pixels by 112 pixels. Like it is, it's a design challenge, and it really even if I do a rough sketch at like 256. Which is like 4 times the size, twice the size. 4 times the size. And then I reduce it down. You have to sacrifice some of your favorite things about a design, which is an excellent exercise as an artist and a designer. It's like, I really like the way that I drew that eye. I really like the way that, for example, the recent portrait I did of you, the way that your hair looked in the original concept. Loved it. Could not translate it. I had to change it because the little spikies just don't read when it's a teeny tiny little thumbnail that ultimately displays on Twitch chat at 56 pixels wide, right?
Art is that way. You have to kill your darlings occasionally.
Yes,
is
right?
a phrase that stuck with me. I think from more the world of literature than the world of visual art, but the two have a distinct crossover in times like that.
And if you want to see a unique experience, normally when I do streaming, I have to break things up. I have to do a bunch of concepts, get clients' approval, come back, do the cleanup, that sort of thing. But you were actually in the chat recently, I think it was Tuesday, and I was able to take one of my concepts from complete blank screen all the way to the final graphic in one stream. And that was a lot of fun. And so I get a lot of questions sometimes about my process. So if you're looking for some behind the scenes, my most recent art stream, I think it might be the one before. I can't remember. But one of the most recent art streams, one with Johnny with his face, is the main emote that I did. if you check that out, then you'll see the full process from start to finish. So
Yeah,
I'm having a lot of fun
super
doing
cool.
online too.
It's super cool seeing that stuff come together, and especially although you say several times throughout your streams like you're not taking suggestions from the chat necessarily. Occasionally there will be something that somebody has some input on that changes the concept around a little bit. Like I know with the tombstone emote that I suggested initially,
Yes.
somebody in the chat, I think one of your moderators suggested having the kind of teacup that's one of my other emotes kind of broken open and all of the tea sort of evaporating as if the tea has broken, like the mug has fallen from my hand and it's all evaporating like a ghost would sort of thing. And I thought that was a really interesting twist on it. Makes it so much more unique. And it's the kind of thing that it's not necessarily designed by committee. It's a suggestion coming from somebody that you trust as a moderator of your channel and a frequent kind of visitor, but also it brings in that element of stuff that you wouldn't have thought of, and multiple heads coming together, two heads being better than one in some cases. It's a lot of fun seeing that stuff happen live.
Exactly, and thank you. And I think too that there's a subtle difference between what you've experienced this as what we call backseat gaming, when people just pop into your channel and start barking orders and tell you to do this and do that, when you're very clearly doing something else. Like you're working on a sugarcane farm and they say you should go fight the dragon. You're just like, why would I stop what I'm doing and go do what you want me to do? And there's a subtle difference between I am working on the RIP emote and I'm stuck and I'm looking for open suggestions and I am in the brainstorming phase. I'm sketching multiple ideas, right? And then someone like Skull Daisy Gimp, who was the moderator that came up with this idea, says, "Hey, what about a broken teacup as instead of a tombstone or whatever?" And ultimately what ended up happening was, like, we took your idea of the tombstone and his idea of the teacup and combined them together into something better. And the difference there is that some other people will come in and just say, you should do an emote that has, like, you should do, it's very specific. It's like some one thing that happened in your video and they're just, you should do this, or you should make the letters bold, or you should do that. And when it comes to like the technical stuff, it's just like, no offense, guys, but I've been doing this for a while. I kind of know what I'm doing. So when I get into the cleanup stuff, it's like, oh, you should make this orange. It's like, nope, I'm making it red because that's what Johnny asked for. And, and they're also coming in partway through the stream where they don't know the context. They don't know what's going on. And they haven't framed it in the form of a suggestion, right?
Yeah.
It takes a few extra seconds to just take the time to say, what about, or here's a thought. That sort of thing, whereas like you should, or do this. And I understand that there can be a little bit of oversensitivity. Some artists, and I can be a little bit like this. I try not to be, especially on client work, where you get your back up a little bit. When people say, that's not good, you should do it this way. And I'm always reminded by my friend Peyton, who started this podcast with me and is an animator and has been doing a lot of client work his whole career. Whenever I dealt with him, because I actually supervised him on his first art gig in the industry, and he always was very polite and saying, like, nothing is precious. Like, don't worry about hurting my feelings. This isn't my baby, as you said earlier. Like, he's like, I'm here to get paid and draw for a living, and I expect you to tell me how to fix this so that the client likes it. And so when I'm doing client work, I have a little bit more of a, yeah, okay. Like I'm never putting my heart and soul into something. But clients are generally in emails a little bit more articulate than a Twitch chat.
Yes.
Because and I'm not necessarily blaming people. I'm suggesting that maybe the form of communication, a Twitch chat is meant for short stuff. And I agree that I don't want paragraphs in Twitch chat either. I find that really hard to deal with. I'm not going to read it out loud. It makes me pause and stop what I'm doing while I'm reading this book, so I understand that you have to keep the conversations short, but sometimes just those couple extra words makes a big difference in Twitch chat. But I really don't like backseat gaming. I really don't like backseat artists. It's a real pain. So don't do it.
When it's your profession at that point, you have a sense of like, there's professional pride enters into it, but it's also like, just trust me to understand what I'm doing because I've been doing it for this long. It's the same with me in Minecraft now. People keep reminding me of mechanics that exist, and I'm like, I know about that. I'm just doing it this way for now. Like, calm down. It's okay.
Yeah. And again, setting it in the form of a question is like, Johnny or Pixlriffs, how come you're not doing this technique? And you can say, that's a good question. I'm aware of that technique, but I wanted to try something different. And that's an honest question. It's less of it doesn't slam your knowledge of the game, right? By popping in saying like, you should do it this way. It's like, well, I don't want to do it that way, because it in the Twitch context, it sounds like dance monkey dance, right? Like that.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the issue that I have. Speaking of Twitch, I actually should put this out because I do promote the Twitch channel quite a bit on here. I got hit yesterday by 15 to 17,000 bots. On Twitch,
30 to 50 feral bots.
So
they started rampaging.
Yeah, so they all came in, they all followed the channel, and they all started spamming some inappropriate stuff. It was very clear to everyone watching, oh, this is not true. These are obviously bots. What unfortunately it did do is wreck a goal that I had set for myself for January that I'm probably never going to know if I actually hit it. But I had around 18 to 1900 followers, and I was shooting for 2,000. I wasn't advertising this. It was just a metric that actually I was hanging out in Stenos' stream last night, and he articulated this very well. As a creator, you're trying to make good content and move your stuff forward. And one of the metrics, while you don't necessarily use it as a Bible, but one of the metrics that you can use to say, am I doing better? Is the channel growing? Is the number of followers that you have? Now, all of these things require other people to take an action. So it's not a good thing to measure yourself up against in terms of your quality, but in terms of are the strategies you're doing working or not working. Having an increase in followership and increase in views is probably a pretty good indicator. Oh, the thing that I'm doing this month is more popular than what I was doing last month. However, when your followers go from 1,898, because that's the last time I checked, and we were just talking about this before the bot thing happened with one of my mods, I think it was Cosmic, and now I have 17,000 followers on Twitch, as according to the Twitch numbers.
None of whom are useful.
No.
Is the main thing. None of whom are actually going to come back, or at least you hope they don't come back in this case.
That's the number that's reading. So I've got no idea if I'm going to hit the 2,000 mark. I mean, I can do some math. I can say, okay, I can take 1,898 away from whatever the number is that I have now, and then figure out like, okay, well, where should I be in terms of like, just use this as a new base 0 or as a new base, 1,900. I can probably gauge as to whether or not I hit this 2,000 mark. But until Twitch fixes this issue, because there's nothing I can do about it, and finds these bot accounts and deletes the accounts, and hopefully then that will reset the follower count number, because I'm assuming that if a legit person follows your account and then a year later they delete their Twitch account or their Twitch account is deleted because maybe they're violating some sort of terms and service, then that person would then disappear from your follower account. I'm hoping that the numbers that Twitch gives you is not how many times the follow button has been clicked, but rather how many followers you have, how many active accounts are actually following you on Twitch.
I would assume that was the case.
Yeah. So unfortunately, I have to kind of wait for that. So I put a little ticker in my chat saying like, from advice from my mods, which kind of also cross over to your moderator's crew, we moved the chat to be followers only, and you have to be a follower for now for 3 months. I think I'm going to move that closer to a shorter distance as this bot stuff tends to be cleaned up a bit. But there's going to be like a little ticker every 15 minutes that says, hey, sorry if you're new, because of these bots, the chat is in follower only mode. And until you're following for a while, there's really not much we can do. And it's just a way to kind of alleviate the issue of this happening again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think when it comes to like short attacks like that, I also feel like you can set a small follower-only time limit, because if they can't disrupt your chat instantly, they tend to just go away again.
Right.
So it could probably be backed off a little bit for your next stream, and if you start to see it like happening not at all, or if you see it happen because for whatever reason they have the patience to sit around and like target you specifically, then yeah, you can adjust it again to match that. But it's a learning process. I think it's one of those things that like once it's happened to you on Twitch, it's kind of like a trial by fire in a sense, but it's also educating you to something else that can happen on the platform and teaching you the skills you need to overcome that problem when it occurs.
Yeah.
So bots not great, but overall Twitch is more powerful than them and will hopefully end up getting rid of them.
Yeah, I
in
hope
the
so
fullness
too.
of time.
I'm surprised there's not a little bit more tools on the user side for that kind of thing. But like, I guess given that Twitch is, I mean, I don't want to say free because obviously they take a chunk of my revenue. But given the size of the platform, you think that they would have more tools in place for this kind of thing. And honestly, I'm kind of surprised that it happened to me because I am not a big Twitch streamer. And two, that I hadn't heard about it before. That I hadn't seen it happening and know, oh, this is happening on Twitch. I even went to Google it afterwards. Nothing. Could not come up with any other people saying, hey, this just happened to me. Could not find a thing outside of someone told me that it happened to you. I was like, this is insane. How is no one talking about this on the internet? I thought it was really bizarre. But anyway, we should move on to the main guts of the show. We are going to be talking about Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker, as promised. We are also going to be talking about the Mandalorian series on Disney Plus. We are going to be spoiling both. We're gonna separate the conversations. There's a little bit of overlap, but we're gonna separate the two conversations. So if you have seen one and not the other, you can either fast forward or just stop the show when we get to a certain point, and then come back later after you've seen the one that you're missing. But there is no way to really talk about these and tiptoe around them, and I'd rather not do that. So we're going to dive into it. But before we get into the Star Wars talk, you had a couple of other things that you saw over the holidays that you wanted to relay.
Yeah, some quick honorable mentions. First of all, if you're following the career of Rian Johnson at all after whatever you thought of The Last Jedi, you might know that he has a movie out called Knives Out. I think it was even nominated for a couple of Academy Awards or some sort of awards, Golden Globes or something like that, maybe, for the screenplay. It is a phenomenal film. It is really well shot. It is incredibly well acted. The cast is phenomenal. It's a very, very funny movie in a lot of ways. Effectively, if you imagine it like... it's kind of like Clue or Cluedo, as I would think of it. It's marketed kind of like Clue as well, because I think on the poster everybody is wearing like different colored outfits. It's a little bit less like you are Miss Scarlet, you are Professor Plum kind of thing, but it's a murder mystery with Ana de Armas as the kind of main character, and Daniel Craig is in it. Jamie Lee Curtis is in it, Michael Shannon, like a whole bunch of incredible actors and people who, because of the amount of well-known actors on screen, it doesn't suffer from that thing of like the most famous person in the room definitely did it. The way everything unfolds in this movie, I will not spoil it for you because it really does need to be seen in order to make sense of the structure of the movie, is very clever, and unlike a lot of other murder mysteries I've seen, and I haven't seen a huge amount, I'm not an aficionado of the genre or anything, but if you're at all interested in that stuff, definitely check out Knives Out when it comes out. Is a wonderful movie. Have you seen Knives Out? Did you manage to catch that one when it was in theaters?
No, I didn't see it in theaters. Lou did. Lou saw it and had a lot of nice things to say about it on Citadel Cafe last time he was on. But no, it's one of those things where like, it's the kind of movie where I know I'll like it, but I'll more than likely catch it when it's on video, like when it's on demand.
Yes.
Yeah.
By all means do. It's really, really good. The other thing, on the plane back from California, where I spent Christmas with my wife's family, I watched Spider-Man Far From Home, which was one I'd missed in theaters because
I missed that one too.
After Endgame, I just kind of felt like I needed a little bit of distance from the Marvel Cinematic Universe before deciding whether or not I wanted to dive back in. And it was a good flick. It was genuinely very entertaining. I thought the stuff they did with Mysterio was great. There are a few things I didn't like about it. It annoys me in Marvel films when, because they are setting up the superhero to be like, he's a kid, but he's also got to be responsible, and he's learning how to be responsible from adults like, in this case, Nick Fury and Jake Gyllenhaal's character to a certain extent. Like, he's idolizing these grown-ups who have this kind of like world safety level responsibility. His teachers, by contrast, are comic relief, and they are bumbling idiots, and that really grates on me. I dislike the fact that these people who are supposed to be adult authority figures just can't seem to get their own lives together. Like, there's a scene where he's on a plane, this is really not a spoiler, he's on a plane, has to sit next to his teacher, and his teacher is, like, trying to talk to him about his breakup and stuff, and I'm like, don't do this. Like, this is not how adults interact with kids. Like, not every teacher has to be this kind of, like, I'm trying to be cool, like I'm in my 30s now, and Exactly, and having some kind of like midlife crisis next to this kid on a plane whose only thought is, oh crap, I'm Spider-Man. So it kind of, that rubbed me the wrong way. Everything else about the movie was pretty well executed. Jon Favreau's character actually gets a surprising amount of development, given that he was mostly just kind of a bit part in the other Iron Man movies. So yeah, Spider-Man Far From Home was genuinely pretty good. I don't know if I would have gone out and, seen it in the cinema in retrospect, but watching it on a plane was delightful. It was a nice way to pass the time because I can never sleep on planes. Last thing, if anybody has not played Celeste, which is a platformer on a lot of different consoles, it's on PC as well. Really lovely game. Can be frustrating as a platformer, but there's a great assist mode if you just want to get through and play the story. The story is genuinely lovely. It is an indie darling. It's known for being, a really good indie game from the last few years, but that's highly recommended. And I won't say any more about it than that because we need to talk about Star Wars.
Yeah, it's going to be difficult to unpack all of what we have to unpack in this episode. I've got a funny feeling, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, there might be a post-show special for the patrons, as Johnny and I have actually even had some extended Spawn Chunks call conversations where we got into Star Wars and said, okay, we gotta go. We've got stuff to do today. we have to move on. And I'll set this up briefly and then let you go at it, because I have given my kind of like spoiler-free first impressions of the Rise of Skywalker on the podcast a couple weeks ago. But for those of you that are wondering, the Rise of Skywalker, of course, follows Rey, Finn, and Poe Dameron as they lead the Resistance's final stand against Kylo Ren and the First Order, who are now aided by the return of the deceased Galactic Emperor Palpatine. This isn't a spoiler; it's in the crawl. Look, it's in the first moments of the movie.
It's in the trailers. It's in Fortnite. It was in Fortnite. I'll get to that. Sorry, carry on.
Anyway, so spoiler warning. Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. We are going to talk about this now. We will let you know before we switch gears into the Mandalorian series on Disney Plus. But right now, Rise of Skywalker. Johnny, you saw it, I think, opening night or close to it, and then didn't have to deal with any internet spoilers. I actually lasted like 4 or 5 days having not been spoiled by the internet. So what were your initial reactions to The Rise of Skywalker?
My wife and I saw it. It was opening day. It was kind of a late afternoon showing. I came out ultimately feeling fairly disappointed. My wife was slightly more optimistic than I was, but there was definitely a lot of stuff in this movie we rolled our eyes at. I want to go through some of the good stuff first, and we'll do the bad stuff sandwich, where we'll try and circle back at the end to we can probably close out on something nice. So the highlights for me were that there were no bad performances in this movie. Like, I wasn't really upset with anybody's acting or portrayals of the character. I think the cast is still really solid. There were a bunch of really great fight scenes. Visually, it was stunning. It's a Star Wars movie. It can't not be at this point. The production design is so on point. You love being back in the universe and seeing all of this stuff. And to some extent, because this movie revisits locations like the destroyed husk of the Death Star and stuff like that. That was in the trailers too, I believe. You kind of, it's really interesting seeing all of the stuff from the original trilogy and even earlier in some cases recontextualized this amount of time on, and seeing this epic stuff in the background, like the destroyed Death Star drowning in an ocean on this planet that was not previously really seen in the Star Wars universe. All of the kind of battle in Return of the Jedi takes place on or around Endor. But yeah, there's this completely different ocean moon that has the Death Star in it. It's super cool looking. We got to see more of the galaxy as well, which I think the last movie, Rise of, what's it called? The Last Jedi. I'm just having trouble passing all of the names at this point. Force Awakens showed you some new places. I feel like Last Jedi didn't really, because most of it took place either in space or on the island that Luke was hermiting himself, where you'd already seen that at the end of the previous movie. And so the only location they introduced was kind of the casino planet and the place at the end.
I was about to say, and we don't talk about the casino planet because everybody hated it. So
Yeah, I mean, I in retrospect, not that bad for me, but I'll get to it. I think this movie had a bunch of different locations that it traveled to. There were new planets. There was a desert planet where they were having a kind of Burning Man style festival that was kind of cool to see stuff like that. And obviously you have the location of Exegol, which is where the climactic battle happens. That's the evil hidden Sith planet. Looking forward to unpacking what that means a little bit more. In terms of like the cast and stuff, the cameos were really solid. Spoiler alert, Harrison Ford turns up and reprises Han Solo very briefly in a scene later in the movie. Wedge turns up at the end in the gunner's seat of the Millennium Falcon, which is very cool. Richard E. Grant is in this movie as another Imperial general, and he is really good. I think his character's name is General Pride.
Yes.
And he looks like he could have been in the original kind of cast. He looks like he could have been Peter Cushing's character. I think he's got the hairline for it mostly. It's the Widow's Peak is a very Imperial look.
Yeah,
so
and there's something about that level of actor, like that level of like
yes.
old.
He has gravitas at this point.
Yeah, old school British stage actor that's in film. You know what I mean? Like I feel like that they have that presence. They have that. Something that this movie doesn't do all that well, but he does, is providing acting emotion and presence without saying a whole lot. Like he doesn't have to say, "I'm angry," because you can tell that he's an evil SOB, right? Like you don't.
Richard E. Grant is definitely somebody who can wither you with a look.
Yeah, and exactly.
I think he does that well in this movie. He also withers people with guns, but again, we'll get to that. Discovering that Leia was just as badass with a lightsaber as Luke, but then gave it all up, was kind of like, I was on the fence about that, but as soon as they had a flashback to them training together, I kind of went, oh, and I kind of gripped the seats and I was like, I want to see more of that. And obviously, I don't think we ever will at this point, but it excited me that there was another aspect to that character that we could really hold up. And, you know, in addition to all of the stuff, you know, she's this general and she's been this leader for all of the rebels for so long. And the amount of stuff she's been through as a character just cements her as one of my favorite characters in the whole series. And it is really a shame that we didn't get to see more of it. And also, surprise highlight of this movie for me was Babu Frick, who is introduced a little bit later as a mechanic character who they have to use in order to hack C-3PO so that he will talk Sith at them, which is a little bit weird, but at the same time, it introduces this kind of surprisingly delightful character. And I've listened to a couple of other podcasts where they've discussed this movie, and they said it was something that made me not think about Baby Yoda for a couple of minutes, because there was this other new cute puppet character who was just like small and eccentric and a little bit weird. And I enjoyed the inclusion of like another weird alien race, or, you know, just this other kind of character who pops up in a couple of surprising places and is genuinely there for comic relief, but is also kind of fun. It reminded me a little bit of the curmudgeonly Yoda from the beginning of his meeting with Luke in Empire, where he's just hitting R2-D2 with a stick.
Right.
You know,
the misdirection, the old, play the senile old coot, you know, but
actually incredibly skilled under the surface.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
I got a little Men in Black vibe from Frick.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. I think but they said on the Flophouse podcast, they said like, you know, the character design team just went like, can we have maybe like 200% more ghoulie in this character? Is basically where they went with it.
Yeah, I feel like they part of that, it's not that it was any kind of intentional thing. It just, for me, it's just like it's in pop culture. You've seen it before. It would be very difficult to design a big-eyed small alien and not have anyone think of Men in Black, right? Because it's like that's the first time that you've seen something like that. That was
or Pepe from the Muppets is the other one that springs to mind.
Yes, yeah, like, no, that's a good call too. Yeah. Also owned by Disney.
Yes, it turns out Disney owns a lot of stuff these days.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you on the visually stunning thing. Like, I mean, there's a few things that I cannot fault the movie for, which is that, I mean, it looks and feels, sounds, and just generally gives you like a good Star Wars feeling. It doesn't feel like it's not a Star Wars movie. It still hits those notes. Speaking of, before I forget to mention it, the music, of course, scored by John Williams, is fantastic.
It's the last Star Wars movie he's going to do,
Yeah.
apparently.
Yeah.
Even if there are, presumably no more for the Skywalker saga, but if there are future Star Wars movies, which I'm fairly certain they do have planned for the franchise, John Williams is no longer going to be scoring them, which is a shame, but I feel like he has had a long legacy of working with Lucasfilm, and he's done incredible work, and we can all raise a glass to John Williams for
Absolutely. And also let the man retire. Like, come on.
that. For goodness sake. I mean, you'd say the same about Harrison Ford, really, in this case.
Yeah.
Yeah, true.
But yeah, it's one of those things where it's sad, but it's just like, well, I mean, like, you don't want to, it's one of those things where you don't want to stretch it too thin. Like, keep it special. Keep it on these particular films and then move on for someone else. Now, refresh my memory because I don't have it in front of me. But were films like Solo and the other Star Wars one,
Rogue One.
Rogue One, were they scored by Williams? They weren't, I don't think.
They weren't. I think Rogue One definitely wasn't. I'm not sure about Solo, but I would suspect not. I feel like he is credited as, he did the Star Wars theme, and they obviously call back to pieces of music that he's done, but I don't think he scored the majority of those movies.
Yeah. And they do stuff like this. I mentioned last week that I've been watching the Rebels cartoon, and they do stuff like this as well, where the whole film, or the whole series has its own score. Like, it's not, John Williams is not scoring a cartoon. But they're pulling from poignant moments. They're pulling the Luke theme. They're pulling the Empire theme. They don't do the Imperial March so much, but they do a lot of like themes from Empire Strikes Back during like the Falcon chase scenes. Whenever there's TIE fighters chasing the Ghost, they tend to like step up the music in that way. And if the good guys in Rebels have a victory, then there's this little trill that they throw in there that's definitely like a Star Wars, they have all that kind of stuff in there. But it's obviously just a composer for the cartoon pulling little themes and little snippets from the existing Star Wars universe. And I think that's great. I think it's going to be cool to see what new composers will do for new films, pulling from the existing themes. And we had some new stuff too. Obviously, in the last 3 movies with Rey, we've got Rey's theme, which is probably one of my favorite themes in the Star Wars musical canon. Is stuff that they have here. And before we move on from John Williams, I want to point out that he was in the movie. He was the bartender on the planet that they go to when they go like to Poe's past, where they have to meet this mechanic to fix 3PO. And they go through the bar scene.
Kijimi, I think, is the planet. Yeah. Kijimi.
I am going to get all of this stuff wrong. All of the names of places and people. I did not dig my teeth into this film like I did others, so I'm not going to remember the names and stuff like that.
It's also worth pointing out that we both only seen it once. We considered going back to refresh our memories and just thought, no, we don't want to spend the time on that.
Exactly, and this leads me to one of the problems of the film. But knowing that John Williams finally got to be in a Star Wars film is fantastic. Like I'm tickled by that. I thought that was fantastic. So my problem with the film after going to see it and trying to come up with these notes and decide, the good versus the bad, I find that most of the points that I make also have like, oh yeah, that was a good point, but, and this is a really cool scene, but, and I keep on flopping back to being constipated about how to talk about this film, because for every beat that they hit right, I feel like they yank the carpet under you like 2 minutes later. And it makes it very hard, because I thought I had the time. I had the time this month to go and see The Rise of Skywalker again. I didn't want to. I just didn't want to go see it. Now, since then, and since putting these notes together and thinking about the film, I do sort of feel like I want to go see it again, just to kind of like try to prove myself wrong. It's like I've gone from I don't really think I liked it to I don't want to see it again to maybe I should go see it again to see if I'm wrong on some of these things and try to change my own mind. And
we're still in the denial area of the stages of grief at this point.
Exactly. Because I don't like that I don't like it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to walk out of a Star Wars movie going, it's okay, right?
Yeah.
Because that's not the feeling you want. You want to be like, oh, that was amazing, I did have the same feeling, and I've talked about this on the show before, when I left Endgame for the first time.
Yeah.
I didn't not like it, but I was bummed. And I was like, this is weird. Why do I feel this way? And it was because I was sad it was over. And now, on a second viewing of Endgame, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I really, really
Yes.
liked it. Now, in part, it was, I knew what was coming. I was there with my sister who hadn't seen it. So she then was reacting to things for the first time, and I was really enjoying her reactions to stuff. Um, Shout out to my sister who cries every time Chris Evans is on screen. Yeah. So I'm going through that kind of it's very much like grief with this movie. And I have to give a shout out here to Let's Talk About Star Wars, which is the podcast with Garrett Weinzierl, Jenny Josephson, and Tom Merritt, some of my favorite podcasters. And they did a talk about Star Wars in one of their episodes. I think it was episode 59. I'll have a link to it in the show notes. They provide a very level-headed conversation about the film and help me in many ways articulate the mixed feelings that I've had about Star Wars over the last few years because of The Last Jedi and because of Rise of Skywalker. So I want to give this podcast a shout out because I feel the same way in a lot of ways that they do. I just wasn't able to really kind of get it down on paper somehow.
Yeah.
And so I want to make sure people know that there's some very good content out there, because a lot of the articles and stuff that you might read in the reviews of The Rise of Skywalker are very blah. Like they don't, much like the movie, they don't really commit to much. And they seem to be playing it just as safe because no one wants the flood of Star Wars, fandom coming in and bashing your article or whatever. And I find that while I like The Force Awakens, even though I know it's just a reimagined, A New Hope. Like it really doesn't go outside the box very much. It's very safe. I find The Rise of Skywalker too safe. It really felt like The Return of the Jedi Part 2. Like it's like, hey, do you have the Emperor? Yep. Do you have the battle over the planet? Yep. Do you have the desert battle to start off the movie? Yep. You had it was smacking me in the face how similar to Return of the Jedi it was.
Except instead of Jabba the Hutt, you have a weird serpent thing that they just kind of heal, I guess.
Instead of a Sarlacc pit, you've got sinking sands. Like, it's just like, guys, like, come on. Like, you have more money than God to play with here. Like, how do you just stick inside this teeny tiny little box all the time? Not that there aren't moments that get outside of it, but it's one of those things where it's like, I don't really want to predict how this is going to... You don't know how it's going to end, but you know what's going to happen. You know where you're going to be next. Like, oh, this is the part where Rey goes off and meets the Emperor and they talk for the last third act. Like, it's hard to... It's not like I was disinterested, but I was disappointed I wasn't seeing something new.
Yeah, it's interesting because from what I have heard about George Lucas's conception of these movies originally, he had the idea of them having these rhyming beats to them where, certain actions, certain lines, certain things would basically come back around. And what we're getting in this movie seems to be a weird combination of that and letting the angry comments section write your movie for you. This movie felt almost reactionary to the backlash that The Last Jedi received, but also just some of the stuff, down to the fact that at the end of the movie, they give Chewbacca a medal, which is one of those things that I'm sure a bunch of people have just been harping on for a while, and they kind of felt like, yeah, we could throw that in the movie as a nod to the fans. But it seems like so much in this movie is capitulating to the fans instead of having a solid filmmaker's vision of how this whole saga should end was kind of difficult. I'm sure it was complicated immensely by the fact that Carrie Fisher passed away shortly after The Last Jedi came out. Because, as a lot of people pointed out, and as I think they've gone on record saying, the first movie in this trilogy was going to feature Han Solo, the second one was going to feature Luke, therefore the third one was going to feature Leia, and each one was going to be sort of centered around one of the main trio from the first trilogy.
Right.
And as a result, Carrie Fisher, who gives a posthumous performance through footage edited in from outtakes they still had from the filming of The Force Awakens, basically. She almost feels like a ghost in the film. She feels like a Force projection without the VFX to me. Everything down to her lines feeling kind of vague and open to interpretation because they had to be to fit around the plot of this movie. it almost feels like she isn't there. And it's weird because of the subject matter of Star Wars and the fact that we know that the characters can sort of return in some form, in this sort of spectral form from the afterlife. It almost feels, in a meta way, that's what Carrie Fisher is doing in this movie. And I know they went back and forth on using any footage of hers in the first place. They initially said they weren't going to, and they weren't going to recreate her digitally either. But then I think after the original director parted ways with this project and J.J. Abrams came in to direct, I think they kind of had to do something to revamp that. And I feel like that may also have been why they called in favors from basically everybody else in the cast. They brought back Billy D. Williams as Lando. They brought back Ian McDiarmid as the Emperor. And, you know, a few other people ended up coming in just to kind of give the movie one last hurrah, because they'd almost lost the draw of having a new, nuanced Carrie Fisher performance in this movie.
And I think, too, that if you're going to go this way, if you're going to make the decision to have the Emperor be the bad guy, then you have to get in, like, McDermott back. That's his name, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so you have to. You would be subject to the ire of, you know, everyone if you got a different actor, you know.
Yeah.
And so to the Leia thing happens kind of mostly in the middle of the film, I feel. And so I guess we're going to be jumping all over the place because I don't want to kind of go back to something else and then come back to Leia. But I was forgiving of the kind of wooden dialogue that they kind of used from Leia, because I knew it was used, you know, after she'd passed away. Like they didn't have her there.
You can't really separate it from the context of, like, you know, this actor is unfortunately no longer with us.
Yeah. What I did like about it is that they did not do a CG Leia like they did at the end of
Rogue One.
I like the fact that they just, you know, if it was footage they had, they used it. If they didn't have footage of her, but they maybe had audio, or they could piece together audio, then they gave you the shot of, I'm assuming, a stunt double's head, but at the back of her head. So you're like, okay, so like this is working. I can also appreciate how difficult it would be for Daisy Ridley, for Oscar Isaac, for anybody that had to interact with Leia in those scenes to record new dialogue for the Rise of Skywalker, pretending that the friend that they had passed away was standing in front. Like
absolutely,
that had to be hard as a human. Hard. Forget as an actor. Like there's a lot of things that I kind of like. Well, okay, whatever. This is not going to rub me the wrong way because I know what it is. I also feel, unfortunately, that it could have been done better when Leia dies in this. She passes away in the same way that Luke does. Luke uses the Force to project himself across the universe and basically taunt Kylo Ren into a temper tantrum to give the rest of the rebels a chance to escape.
Yeah.
And then that effort ultimately kills him. And so when Leia does the same thing, who is perceived to be as strong as, or maybe not as strong as Luke, she is then, you know, this effort also kills her. And she does that to Kylo. She reaches out to Kylo, but it's so brief. They because, and I think again, probably because Carrie Fisher has passed away, like this is the point where you need some more dialogue, right? Because she never talked to Ben in any of the other movies, right? She maybe said his name once, which is what we got, right? But we've not seen any kind of flashback conversations, nothing like that. And so they have nothing to work with. So all they do is get her to, they give the audience a murmur of Ben across the stars. Leia dies, and Ben flips to the light side again. And to me, it was an excellent idea. And I hesitate to say poorly executed. I think it was executed. They tried the best they could, but they still didn't quite land it. And I think a lot of that probably had to do with the fact that Fisher had passed away. Again, I want to credit Let's Talk About Star Wars about this, getting this idea into my head. I don't remember who said it. It might have been Tom, but I kind of feel like the Harrison Ford cameo was because Carrie Fisher passed away. Had she not died, it would have been her standing there instead of Harrison Ford. Like that would have been the moment between Kylo, because Kylo had the moment with his dad in The Force Awakens, and then he was going to get his moment with Leia, but Carrie Fisher died. So they had to put Solo there, which is fine. It works. I think the only problem is that it happens as two separate events. I think either, and this is where my memory is foggy, either because they cut to Daisy Ridley getting away, like Rey gets away in the TIE fighter, or Kylo's shuttle, I can't remember which. But the problem is that there's this disconnect between Leia reaching out to Ben and then Han appearing. I wish that they had made it clearer, because this is what I think the intent was, but I wish it was just very, very crystal clear that you see Leia lying down and reaching out to Ben, like reaching out and saying Ben. But then when you see Ben, who you hear saying Ben is Han Solo. And so there's this clear idea that Carrie is reaching out to her son, but she knows that it's not her he needs to see, it's his dad. And if that was a clearer thing, rather than he's now just somehow flipped and now is seeing an image of his dad, it like that to me felt so disconnected, where it could have been a lot simpler. And I feel like that's one of the things that this movie does a lot, where they take something that could be so clean and simple and they overcomplicate it. And it just becomes so much to digest that you don't have time, and then you're on to the next thing and you're trying to take everything in. He's like, I don't know how I feel about, event E, and I'm on to already event F, G, and H. Like I just have not had time to process anything before they move on to something else.
I felt like a lot of the events of this movie, because it takes place as a structure of them basically traveling from place to place, trying to find MacGuffin after MacGuffin until they get to Exegol. So I feel like that was, in a way, it was the problem. It was that the movie had to keep this kind of pace that allowed you to be just kind of swept up by it and not to rest on any one thing, because if you were allowed to rest on any one thing for any great length of time, you would find they didn't have a great deal of substance behind it. Mm-hmm. The only stuff that really has substance is the meetings between Rey and Kylo, which are good. And I feel like that the thing about Kylo Ren's sort of resurrection and his like flip to the light side is it almost reminds me of the end of the first Matrix movie, where Neo basically gets killed and then sort of comes back, and then he's got all of these powers. It's kind of like that for me. It's, Kylo Ren has to be defeated by basically everybody on the quote-unquote light side of the Force. Like, his mother reaches out to him, Rey is fighting him at the time, he's distracted, he gets killed, and then Rey heals him, which is sort of a new power of the Force as far as we're concerned, but it actually comes up in The Mandalorian, funnily enough. And then he kind of has this moment of reflection, sees Han Solo, and then hurls his lightsaber away. So it's sort of like he almost comes back from the dead as a fresh new person almost, but still carrying the weight of everything that he's done. So in a way, it kind of works for me, that kind of thing. And I was worried that, like Ben Solo was going to turn good, and then the movie was just suddenly going to forgive him all of the mass murders he had done. And I feel like they almost do that towards the end, but ultimately his character does end up dying at the end of the movie. He doesn't survive this movie. And I feel like there were steps that they were willing not to take in that direction. They were like, well, okay, he's not going to be completely reformed. He's not just going to be like, left to do his own thing. He ultimately has to pay for everything that he's done up until this point.
Well, and it's the same way that they do with Vader, right? I mean, Vader throws the Emperor into the core of the Death Star in Return of the Jedi, and ultimately the lightning shorts out his suit. He's not going to make it, and Luke has to leave him on the Death Star, and it explodes and dies.
In this movie, the Emperor gets to do the throwing.
Yeah, sorry, I got that wrong. Luke pulls him off. He dies on the Death Star, but Luke pulls the body and gives him a funeral pyre on the planet.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things where it's just like that kind of a thing. It's like once you've gone down this dark path, there really isn't any redemption of your person. Your spirit, your soul can be flipped back, but once the chances of you surviving the atonement, pretty slim, is what I tend to get from that. But while we're talking about this kind of like flip scene with Rilo,
Rilo.
Yeah, they got the social media's got me all terminology flipped around. With Rey and Kylo, probably the best fight scene I've seen in a while, in terms of lightsabers. And you've got Rey, who's a full-on trained, Jedi on her last mission to become a Jedi. You've got Kylo, who's a force to be reckoned with. on this incredible set of the downed Death Star wreckage on one of the ocean moons in this Endor system.
Yeah, waves crashing around
Yeah.
them and so forth.
I mean,
yeah.
flashback to to Revenge of the Sith with Kenobi and Skywalker fighting on Mustafar with lava flying everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Like down to
Yeah,
down to the colors being flipped around, right? Like you've got, the red and the black, you've got the blue, and Rey is all white. Like you've got all these different things that are flipped around.
It feels like the elemental opposite as well.
Yeah.
It's kind of like lava versus water,
Yeah.
and what water means to Rey, considering she grew up on a desert planet. There's a lot of like symbolism that you can pick out from it in there that's actually pretty cool.
And this is the example of Star Wars imitating Star Wars, but done right?
Yeah,
You
yeah,
don't
definitely.
you don't notice that until you sit back and think about it. If you notice stuff like that, like in the theater, then you're just like, okay, well, now I'm getting pulled out of this. But when you come back and you go, oh yeah, that was a fantastic fight scene, but you can't articulate why in the moment. It's only later you're like, oh yeah. The only beef that I have with it, and this goes back to where I am on this movie, where I have this amazing experience with this scene, but when Leia reaches out to Ben and she distracts him and allows Rey to stab him, I really felt that undermined Rey's progression in defeating Kylo. I kind of feel that she should have been able to defeat Kylo without that distraction. I feel like that would have been a triumph.
In a way, though, that kind of sets the tone for the uncertainty of whether or not she's going to be able to defeat the Emperor, because she effectively has help, and then that help leaves her, and she's been trying to call the spirits of the other Jedi to her for the remainder of the movie. You see her meditating at the beginning, and she needs help still. And then she loses that mentor figure in Leia, and you kind of wonder how it's going to shake out with the Emperor. So I feel like maybe that was their intention. It's like, she's still trying to act, and the whole message of the movie was like, the Empire wins, the dark side wins if you feel like you're alone, if they convince you that you're alone. And I sort of feel like that's maybe what they were going for, is that the last person who could have helped her through the Force seems to have left. And so maybe there's a spark of intention behind that. I agree, though, that it does kind of feel like, your friend kind of going, woohoo, over here for a second, allowing you to stab a guy is not necessarily, I mean, that's putting it in very kind of blunt, crass terms, but that's effectively what it is.
Yeah.
I feel like we need to address the Emperor in the room
at
this point.
Yeah, we've been talking about it a lot. So, again, if you're going to do it, it's done very well in a very Star Wars manner. He's got this giant life system arm thing that is...
He reminds me of GLaDOS from Portal.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Just going to put it out there.
He has this mix of technical, artificial, kind of like know all, be all, I am everywhere adversary, but still has the black, cloaked figure, but even creepier, hung on the end of a stick. Like he looks like he's on a meat hook. Like and they don't show you his feet ever. He just kind of floats. So he looks like a phantom. He looks like an apparition, even though apparently he's got like some physicality underneath there. And it works. I don't really know why they decided to bring the Empire back. I know from the lineage that they reveal of Rey being his granddaughter, and then we'll get into that whole mess. But it's one of those things where it's just like it's such a fight. Like they did it very well. I didn't like that he was back because it just made me feel like I was watching Return of the Jedi. I wanted something new. I wanted something else. I kind of wanted. If you were to ask me, I kind of wanted I did it again. I kind of wanted Kylo to just become full-on evil, like just straight up, no redemption for Kylo. He becomes the new force of absolute evil in the world, because they give you the heads up at the beginning of the movie that time has passed. Rebels have been doing rebellious things. The First Order has been doing imperial things, and it's just become this huge conflict, and the time has come where like you either stop the Empire / the First Order, or they win. Like this, we're at the precipice
again.
And so I really wish that it had been a Kylo Rey confrontation at the very end. I think her having to defeat him despite not wanting to would be an excellent obstacle for her as a Jedi.
And effectively the same beat as the Emperor's whole thing of like you want to kill me, but if you kill me, I win.
Yeah, exactly.
Which fool me once, shame on me, right? It's the same logic he has in Return of the Jedi. It's like if you kill me in anger, then I win because somehow I guess all of the spirits of the Sith transition into her.
Yeah.
My big problem with the Emperor started before the film even began because they had teased the Emperor coming back in trailers. There was a Fortnite crossover event with Star Wars in which the Emperor made this kind of proclamation that the day of the Sith had come. I've linked it for you in the show notes if anybody wants to come and take a look at that and hasn't been playing Fortnite like, I haven't. My problem was in the opening crawl, it starts out with the galaxy has heard this message from Emperor Palpatine saying that the Sith are back and, everybody is going to rise up and evil will rule the galaxy. That's telling and not showing at that point. You're telling me, oh, Palpatine's back. You've seen the trailers. We're going to bring the Emperor back. Why even bother? And then you see him within the first, 2 or 3 minutes of the film. I feel like it would have been way better if he hadn't appeared right at the beginning. Leave it a mystery about whether or not he actually exists, if he is some kind of manifestation of the evil in the Force or the evil in people's hearts or whatever, and then make it a twist when he actually is back. That's what I would prefer. If you're going to include the Emperor as a villain, he needs to be a phantom until the last second where you actually get to see him in the flesh and the terror that he is actually there somehow. Whereas Kylo Ren goes and meets him. In the opening crawl, it says, with the intent of destroying anything that might stand in his way of becoming the supreme leader. And then he hesitates because naturally they want to introduce Kylo as a more complex character, and the Emperor is the incarnation of evil. Then later in the movie, you have to confront the fact that Rey is his granddaughter, which sucks because we have to confront the reality of the ultimate galactic evil also being a dude who had sex at some point. And I don't want that in my Star Wars. I'm sorry.
No.
I get that one of the messages of the series as a whole is that good can come from something that becomes bad, and so you have Luke as a child of Anakin, you have the parallel of that of Rey being Palpatine's granddaughter, but it promotes this idea that you have to be part of this important bloodline in order to have power in the Force and to become like a Jedi or a Sith or whatever. And that kind of subverts what The Last Jedi was trying to do, love it or hate it, by saying that basically anybody could be a hero. And I feel like that's a stronger message overall than, you can be a hero if you're a Skywalker or a Palpatine. And ultimately Rey at the end chooses to be a Skywalker.
So what I find when people latch on to that idea of the lineage, and either you're either in the lineage or either you're out of the lineage, and I find that they forget that as love them or hate them, the prequels established that there was a lot of different Jedi in the world from a lot of different lineages, and the Skywalker saga, it's not that they are technically I guess they had Anakin and Darth Vader as like the most powerful Jedi Knight into the most powerful Sith. But to me, it was like, it's not the only way. It's just like, this happens to be a very strong way. It's kind of like you've got police officers and firefighters and EMT crews, in films, and doing the hero thing, but then you've got the Avengers. And in the comics and in those kind of worlds, there's heroes and then there's superheroes. And that's how I kind of flip out the Skywalkers. Like, you've got all the heroes in the galaxy in the Star Wars, and there's rebel fighters, there's generals, there's regular Jedi, and then there's the superstars, which are the Skywalkers, the Palpatines, the evils. There's the super villains as well as the villains, right? And I feel like the thing with the Skywalkers that I like the idea of giving a lineage to Rey, and I don't mind that she's Palpatine's granddaughter, but it leaves a giant hole, as in, who is Palpatine's son or daughter? You don't.
It turns out it's his son.
Is it his son?
And he is the guy in the flashback with the Sith assassin who stabs the dude. The dude is Palpatine's son. how he was born, what happens to him, why he decided to run away from his evil dad.
Right.
We don't really know. Was it another situation like Luke and Leia being hidden away
Exactly.
by everybody once Darth Vader turns evil? Like, who knows?
But that to me is not good
that.
storytelling. Like that's something we've received from the Luke and Leia and the Star Wars saga. We know that story, but they don't explain that in, and I don't know how to however they did it. I don't know how to articulate this, but in the original series, A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi, they managed to communicate that Luke and Leia were hidden from the Empire, I think just through a few lines of dialogue from Kenobi in Empire Strikes Back, that they were hidden from them. And so you're like, oh, okay, that's why we don't know where they came from, is because they were hidden. And it's so clean. It's so straightforward. Whereas in this, they don't give you that explanation. Whereas, like, I would have been quite happy with a little bit of exposition from Force Ghost Luke Skywalker to say, yeah, you're a Palpatine. Because if you're going to echo Star Wars and you want to do it in a good way, then when Luke finds out that Vader is his father, he screams, he loses his hand, like he flings himself into Cloud City, into who knows where, and eventually he goes back to Dagobah and has to confirm, like, is Darth Vader my father? Like, he's so conflicted over it. And Rey gets told by Kylo Ren, a mass murderer, that she's a Palpatine, and she goes, oh, huh.
Yeah, and it happens after she's already confronted herself in the remains of the Death Star. Like, she's had that kind of swamp scene, and so it kind of happens in reverse order. So she's almost like prepared for it in a way. Not to mention the fact that she has this Force lightning moment when Chewbacca is supposed to have died but then doesn't. There's a media critic who I occasionally see pop up on my Twitter timeline called H Bomber Guy, and he said it best. He said about this movie, I especially like whenever something interesting happens and then immediately unhappens, so you don't have to worry about it if you didn't like that part. And that seems to be the way they treated any character's death in this, except for right at the very end. Like, Chewbacca could have died. We could actually have had an end for that character. It would have been a shocking end, and I don't feel like it would have fit right, but it would have shown you that there was some stakes at play here and that this was going to be a Wild Bunch scenario. Everybody was going to go down with the ship. And then they're like, actually, no, he was on another identical transport that you just didn't see. And not only that, the audience gets told that way before the characters do. So you're almost yelling at the screen going, no, don't worry about that right now. He's still alive.
Yeah.
You don't have to be doing stuff in Chewbacca's memory. We saw him less than a minute later still alive.
Yeah.
Same with C-3PO. It turns out like they have to wipe his memory after he's revealed the secret of this Sith dagger. And then R2-D2 just has a backup of his memory and he's totally fine. There's so many moments where a character could have died and then they just undo it for the sake of, we don't want to, piss off the fans by killing Chewbacca this way.
Yep.
It feels like really weird.
Yep. Kylo Ren falls into a hole, climbs back out again.
Yeah, exactly. Kylo Ren dies at least twice in this film.
Yeah,
so
3 times.
It's a lot. Well, then again, getting thrown into holes apparently didn't kill the Emperor. So I guess maybe.
Yeah. See, and that's my biggest beef, is that I feel like a lot of the events of the Rise of Skywalker undermine the end of Return of the Jedi. Like, I really wish they had have figured out a way to do another big bad. Again, I think the idea of Kylo as the big bad would have been better. It does bring back, like, some, if you're going to say, okay, well, if you kill me, then I'm going to possess you with all the spirit of all the previous Sith. That does sort of paint the Return of the Jedi throne scene a little bit differently, where, like, now you know a little bit more about why Palpatine wanted Luke to kill him, right? Because Palpatine would then possess Luke, a brand new, young, powerful physical body, where he's already outlived, and has prolonged his own physical life through the dark side, and is basically not physically capable, right? The problem to me is that you didn't need that. Like, I understood the original Return of the Jedi throne room scene as, I want you to reach out in anger to kill me, because it will then make you like, that will cement your transition to the dark side. You cannot go back from murdering me in cold blood. Like, that is, you can't undo that. and then it would make you susceptible to then become Darth Vader's apprentice and blah blah blah. And we, are always two there are, like that kind of stuff. So it didn't need to be a whole possession thing. It could have just very easily just been like, I just need you to be evil. I need you to do an evil thing, and then you're done. Like, that's it. One sin and you're mine. And and I feel like that's something that I didn't like about the Empire stuff. Again, the presence, the acting, the visuals, it all worked, with the exception of the Sith grandstand. But like, again, that's the kind of thing I could like, whatever, it's Hollywood. Like, there's a couple of things about, there's things about all three of these most recent Star Wars films that are very different from the originals because they weren't indie films. Like, not that, I guess Return of the Jedi wasn't an indie film, but like the series did not have nearly the popularity or the weight behind it that it does now. And so it is a different cinema going audience. They are kind of speaking to the lowest common denominator in a lot of ways. There's to get a couple little points out of the way before we move on. I really enjoyed getting a glimpse into the camaraderie between Poe, Finn, and I don't remember the slug's name, and Chewie, I guess. Like, the new Falcon crew is fun. Like, they're running around, they're doing spy stuff, they're shooting things, they're on the chase, they're doing, light jumping that isn't a thing but is a thing now, and like, they're just, Poe gets to be badass but gets to be funny in a dry, sarcastic, not slap you in the face kind of way. Like, in
a way that they didn't make him in The Last Jedi, which is still my wife's biggest complaint.
Exactly.
She's a massive fan of Poe, and she thinks his character got such short shrift in The Last Jedi, and I do agree.
Bad writing in The Last Jedi for Poe, good writing for Poe in Rise of Skywalker. I wanted to know more about his past. I'm trying to remember the character's name. Is it Kerry Russell is actually who played her, even though you never see her face. Zoria?
Her character's name is Zori Bliss.
Zori Bliss. Okay. So Zori Bliss is this badass looking masked, I don't know whether she's a bounty hunter or whether she's just a mercenary or whatever she is.
Very cool is what she is. Yeah, that's all you need to know.
Super cool. Has obviously some sort of mysterious past with Poe. It's not a flame. It's they have a couple of quiet moments on a rooftop where you're like, okay, these people have a history, like whether they were friends, whether they were business partners, whether they were lovers. Like, you can kind of fill in the gaps however you want. And they have this great thing. Then they undermine it at the end when Poe kind of gives this head nod to be like, hey, do you want to shack up? And she's like, no. It's like,
you don't want to make him skeezy right before the credits roll, basically.
Exactly. It's like, no, you pushed it too far. Like, there's all these little things that they do to take things that I really like about this film. And this is where I get conflicted about being sad. I am sad I don't get more Poe Dameron. I'm sad I don't get more Falcon and Chewie and Rey and Chewie. And like, when they get together and do stuff, like, it's fun. Lando Calrissian, fantastic cameo. Loved his reveal. Loved the fact that that he comes in much like Return of the Jedi, Helm of the Falcon. Like, again, there's a lot of these mirrors where there's fan service where it makes you laugh and smile, and it doesn't really affect the film that much. And that's putting Billy D. Williams behind the cockpit of the Falcon. Like, just like grin ear to ear. Don't care that it doesn't make a lot of sense. I'm for it. Really enjoyed that kind of stuff. The epic reveal of all the, everyone showing up at the end in the space battle. Like, there are some notes about this film, especially in, I want to say, the third act, where they really start moving forward, where the pace represents the emotion. Like, it's the climax, stuff is happening. Oh gosh, what's going to happen next? The pace of the film then represents that emotional train, and you're on board. But when you're trying to warm up to it, you're trying to figure out what's going on, in Act 1 and in Act 2, the pace is the same. And you're just like, I need time to breathe. Like, did Chewie just die? I'm upset. I don't want to know. And then they say, oh no, don't worry, you're fine, like you said. And that kind of stuff really kind of bugged me. There's a lot of questions I had. Like, I had questions about Poe's past. I want to know, I mean, like, I think we all kind of figured out what he was going to say, but like, it's a big film no-no to have Finn constantly tell Rey, I have something to tell you, and then never tell her.
Have you heard about the fan asking J.J. Abrams what that was about and getting an answer?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so this is probably going to piss you off even more, so I apologize in advance. Basically, J.J. Abrams...
Before you put in there, I want to put out two predictions. So,
okay.
to me, they painted it into the film like he was going to tell her that he loved her. But the whole idea was that was supposed to be a misdirection because he is supposed to be trying to tell her that he thinks he's force sensitive. That's what I'm getting out of it.
Correct. Yeah. Correct. Entirely correct 100%.
Right. And
so, yeah. That's what J.J. Abrams confirmed it later to be. And I agree, like, yeah, the misdirect is there. But then, ultimately, like, for a start, hey, I'm force sensitive is not something you say to somebody when you think you're going to die.
Yeah.
Because, like, what good is it to them at that point? And also, Finn doesn't get to use it, really.
No.
So it's kind of inconsequential for the rest of the film, which sucks. And again, that sort of maybe hints at why they didn't want to have him say it, but then you just leave this massive unanswered question that ultimately the answer is always going to be disappointing.
Yeah. Anyway,
it's a shame.
Yeah, it's one of those things where they're. I have more to say about that, and I think we should maybe leave that for the post show.
Because I have two more things to say before we get going. You had your two things. I'm gonna have my two things.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
No, absolutely.
I know I'm rambling a little bit here. The first thing is, I think that this movie is going to make a whole lot of sense when it comes out for home viewing and people can marathon it along with all of the rest of the Star Wars movies. Because at that point, you have the Emperor coming back at the end, and if you've watched all of the movies up to that point, the Emperor is the villain throughout the entire thing.
Yes.
So it kind of makes sense at that point. That is the only redeeming quality of bringing the Emperor back for this movie, is it ties up everything else that's happened. Within the context of this most recent, like, sequel trilogy, it sucks bringing the Emperor back because there's no context for him in the rest of the movies, and they've retconned the fact that Snoke was his creation somehow and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I think if you're at home watching it, you're having like a Star Wars night or day. I mean, it's going to be a lot of watching at this point. Yeah, exactly. But if you watch the whole thing sequentially or in whatever order you want to, I think the Emperor coming back for this movie is actually going to tie it off a lot more satisfactorily when you have the other movies there for context. The other thing, it goes back to my theory about Rey's lineage, and something I think would have worked a lot better for her origins in this movie is to make her a clone. Because you might have heard this theory before, but a few people had a theory after The Force Awakens because she picked up Luke's lightsaber and suddenly had all of these ideas. And the last time you see that lightsaber is it's falling attached to his arm from Cloud City. So the idea is that Rey would have been a clone of Luke. And maybe she was created by the Sith, maybe she was created by somebody else, but ultimately, the fact that her parents aren't anybody doesn't matter because she was a clone. The fact that she is tied to some sort of lineage, she is actually tied to the Skywalkers in that sense. The fact that she picks up Anakin's lightsaber and it starts, effectively projecting all of this stuff into her head is because she held that lightsaber once, in theory. Like, there's some sort of genetic memory there. And also then you lose the idea that Palpatine had to have a child and therefore a grandchild at some point, which feels a lot better to me. And also, in a meta perspective, it kind of works because these movies are sort of like clones of the original trilogy, but they become something a little bit different in that. And I feel like Rey being a clone of Luke would be such a great example of, like, this is the source material that we took and it became something different. It became something new and modern and interesting. And that's how I would have loved them to resolve Rey's thing. I was rooting for that theory from The Force Awakens, because I heard somebody mention it on a podcast and I thought that would actually be brilliant. And that's probably what led my disappointment of her being related to Palpatine. But I feel like that would have made a lot more, if not necessarily sense for the story, it would have had a lot more meaning behind it than ultimately, turns out you're somebody's granddaughter. To me,
I agree.
Least.
I agree. And actually, I'm glad that you bring up cloning, because as we move into The Mandalorian, again, spoilers, folks, if you haven't seen The Mandalorian, we are going to get into it. That actually will, I think, become part of the conversation. But first, I should let you know that this podcast is brought to you entirely by listeners, just like you. If you go to the Citadel Cafe on Patreon, then you can become a member and help us make more content. If you're getting a little bit of value out of the show, maybe put a little bit of value back in. It's as little as a cup of coffee a month. So head on over to patreon.com/the Citadel Cafe. Check out the levels available. There is a member-only Discord reward as well as bonus episodes. Johnny and I are going to keep on talking, I think, after we end the main episode here. So there'll be more Star Wars talk for our members if you're so interested. You can check that out at patreon.com/the Citadel Cafe. We are currently at 16 patrons. I would love to make that 17 by February. So if you want to be the next one, then by all means, just head on over there and join the crew. We have a lot of fun in the Discord. I think you would really, really enjoy the nerdy conversations that happen there over the week. Okay, I am very excited to talk about The Mandalorian.
Me too.
I am overwhelmingly positive on The Mandalorian. It was nearly perfect, in my opinion, as a serial series, as a Star Wars, as an offshoot of the main saga. Like, you get all the things that you love about Star Wars in a way that you can digest and that you can enjoy. And I'm really excited that even though Disney Plus hasn't happened in Europe yet, that because you vacationed in the US over Christmas, you got to watch it.
I got to watch it. Thankfully, my friends had a Disney Plus login, and we spent a little bit of time at their house, and they were like, so you want to watch The Mandalorian? And we were like, boy, do I. Honestly, I'm really glad I got to see this series before I got Baby Yoda fatigue from the internet, because that was the one thing that was instantly like, no regard for spoilers or anything, was just every freaking where. And to be honest, it's not a great deal of a spoiler when you consider it in the context of the whole series. Mm-hmm. And if nothing else, it was a great marketing move. I mean, maybe not actually motivated by that, but like putting a cute, like, infant form of Yoda's species in this series, heck yes. I wanted to see it as soon as I saw Baby Yoda, and I was lukewarm on The Mandalorian before this. So yes, like you, a lot of positive things to say about this series. Very, very happy with it.
Yeah, created by Jon Favreau. So obviously, big, props to Favreau for this, and not to mention the fact that obviously responsible for a lot of the Marvel, universe as well. And I feel like you couldn't have picked a better person to understand. I feel like while I know that I don't envy the weight of any creator behind a series for Star Wars, whether it's a movie. Like, J.J. Abrams had a huge weight on his shoulder. I don't want to undermine the fact that I'm aware of that. But I feel like you've got this opportunity where, someone approached, and I don't remember what article I read, but someone approached Favreau and said, hey, do you want to write a treatment for a Star Wars TV show? And he's like, yeah, sure. Mm-hmm. And he goes home and comes back with 8 episodes written, just done. And they're like, we just wanted you to do a pilot. He goes, yeah, well, I'm a Star Wars fan. so I you either do it right or you don't do it at all. And I was like, so good to know. But I thoroughly enjoy it. I do find it a little bit odd in the marketing. Yes, Baby Yoda is everywhere, but I've seen some trailers for The Mandalorian, and they paint it as a badass show. And there are badass moments in this show, but the trailers they leave out a lot of the humor and a lot of
dude, it's goofy as all heck,
yeah,
and I love it.
It is very goofy, but it has these badass moments where it reminds me of this mix between spaghetti westerns, Star Wars, and James Bond films. And James Bond films have humor. Like, anytime Bond is talking to Q, it's hilarious, right?
Yeah.
Interactions between M and Bond, also dry, subtle, has these little winky wink moments. And I feel like they have these moments where they take the Mandalorian and they put him in situations where it's like, this guy's not a superhero. He's not a Jedi. He's just a dude in armor with some gadgets. And yet he manages to get out of this thing by doing something that you did not see coming in the same way that James Bond would. And so there's all these little, it's Western, but it's sci-fi. So you've got all these different tools that you just, you forget. And I think that the show does such a good job of making you feel like a low-tech Western that you forget that there are spaceships and grappling hooks and laser blasters and wrist-mounted heat-seeking missiles. There's all these things that can happen that, you don't see coming, because they do such a good job with the pacing and the dialogue of just making you forget about the tech and making you focus on the story. And I really, really enjoyed that about it. And when I mentioned cloning, the Baby Yoda thing was confusing for a lot of people. And the people are calling the Baby Yoda because we don't know what else to call it.
Yes.
Famously, George Lucas has never revealed the name of the species. Yoda is Yoda's name, but we don't have a name for the species.
There is only one other instance of us seeing a character who is the same species as Yoda. It's a character called Yaddle in the prequels on Coruscant, I think.
Yep.
and that is the only other one. I think maybe has one line if they speak at all. I don't know. And like, yeah, so you have no idea where this baby has come from and why it's ended up where it's ended up.
Yeah. So rather than calling it Yoda, they're calling it like a Yoda, essentially, which is confusing, unfortunately, for a lot of people new to Star Wars. But what I liked so much about it is because it does raise a lot of questions. Like very early on, the reveal of the baby Yoda being the target in the first one, I thought was an excellent, fun twist. Like they say, the target is 50 years old, so you are thinking that this target is going to be some older human, and you just assume that it's just not going to be anybody in particular. You think it's just going to be a new character, new, something new to the series, not anyone familiar. So when it's revealed to be a 50-year-old infant, you're like, oh man, what a brilliant form of misdirection.
And not in a Benjamin Button kind of way.
No,
it's literally like this species ages differently. Yoda was supposed to have been like 900 years old or more. Yeah. So there's a lot of like, again, like you said, it raises questions about like, are there aliens' biology and like what regular people's lifespans are, because as a lot of Star Wars fans are quick to point out, these aren't humans technically in the series. They are just whatever humanoid species.
Yeah.
Like there isn't necessarily a name for them. If there is, it's probably written in some expanded universe
I think they call
dictionary.
them humans. I think that's how that works.
Maybe, but they're not from Earth.
No. It's something else. It's like I can't remember. What do they normally call humans in sci-fi when they're trying to not make it sound like they're from Earth? I can't remember the name of the term. Terrans? Do they call them?
I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah. So like Terran just being like a reference to like a humanoid or basic humanoid sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so it's stuff like that I find interesting. But they raise the question, obviously, like, okay, well, is this another species, another member of the Yoda species that happens to be extraordinarily force sensitive? Or is it a clone of Yoda? Like, did somehow the Empire get Yoda's DNA and had this thing cloned? But obviously they can't do anything with it or about it because it takes 300 years for it to reach maturity, right?
Yes, but the Empire knows about it and wants it, which is also...
Yeah.
And this takes place after The Last Jedi, not the last... Return of the Jedi, sorry. So this is very much post-Empire, and there's an interesting vibe about that because suddenly the Empire is the one where they're meeting in back rooms and sort of having this air of secrecy. They will still march into a town with stormtroopers if they feel like they have the leverage, but a lot of their dealings have to be under the table instead of muscling their way into things while the New Republic is in place. And so that's a really interesting dynamic for the start of this setting. Also works really well for Westerns because, there's a new law in town kind of situation. Like everybody has to be speaking in hushed tones and meeting in back rooms and when everyone else is cleared out of the bar. It's very atmospheric.
Yeah, I mean, and they even do return to Tatooine at some point, but the backwater planet areas of bounty hunting and stuff outside of Imperial rule. And you would operate there because you don't, even when the Empire was at its full strength, bounty hunters were always on the fringe because then you didn't have to worry about jurisdiction. Like you just do what you needed to do.
Yes.
Less Imperial entanglement equals less bureaucracy and you get paid more, essentially, is kind of like what I got from it. And I love how they set that up. The pacing as a Western, I feel, it's something that I wish the movies would take note of. I forgot how well the original movies did the pacing of like panning into a planet. Episodes of The Mandalorian are 35 minutes long. You'll spend 5 minutes dialogue free at the start. Just ship descends to planet, lands on planet. Mandalorian exits, looks around, but he's doing things that indicate what he's going to do.
And it's also kind of marking how alone he is, which is really interesting. Like, he doesn't really have anyone to talk to. Even when he has Baby Yoda on board, he doesn't really talk to him because the character can't respond. He just coos and, like, tries to play with bits of the console, which is amazingly funny. And, like, the amount of times he will leave to go downstairs into his, like, sort of setup area where he's got all of his gear and a bunk and that kind of thing. And then the ship will start shaking and he'll have to come up and Baby Yoda is trying to steer. Or not even trying, just like pulling at stuff and poking things. That's so good. And Yeah, I feel like it really emphasizes the solitude, which once again, he's a lone cowboy, draws in that sort of Western theme.
Yeah.
Once again, it's so tightly woven in. And I'm amazed nobody is doing sci-fi westerns more, because the ones I've seen, Firefly and Cowboy Bebop to a certain extent as well, are both fantastic.
Yeah.
And like tonally, the setting really fits because of like how hard it is to regulate space. So you have a lot of that more independent border town kind of feel. Everything is pioneering. You know, it's not like the Star Trek sense of pioneering. It's like a very kind of, you know, podunk town, we do what we can kind of pioneering. But the Mandalorian has an early introduction, gets bounties, you know, has to hunt down these targets and so forth. But there is also this kind of underground culture of other Mandalorians who are present on the initial planet, Navarro, with him. He gets help from them throughout, including from this one character who is, I believe, only known as the Armorer, who is my favorite character in the entire thing, in the same way that I think Boba Fett was a lot of people's favorite character from the first. She says like 3 things throughout the entire thing, but she looks stunning. Like her like costume design and stuff is so good. I'm going to send you an image, by the way, in the Discord. I might put this in the show notes as well. This is a character from a game called Hyper Light Drifter.
Yes.
Who is Hyper Light Drifter came out a few years ago. I played it. It was a phenomenal game. But it's a kind of indie hack slash kind of Zelda style exploration game. But you get rescued early on by this character who is only known as the Guardian, and it looks the spitting image of this armorer character who's in The Mandalorian. And it's probably a case of sheer coincidence, but like the fur padded shoulders, the helmet, even the shape of the visor on the helmet is pretty similar. And the armorer has probably the most lines to do with what the Mandalorian's beliefs are, because you learn that Mandalorian is not a race, it is a creed. It is kind of a sort of spirituality. And that's one of the things that really brought me in with The Mandalorian, and one of the things I loved about the early Star Wars films that I feel like got lost later was this concept of, you know, the Jedi are referred to as a religion. There is this kind of spiritual element to the Force, and it becomes less about, you know, your actions and how good you are at combat, and more just about how at one with the universe you are. And the Mandalorian, she says later, had a fight with the Jedi at various points. There's probably a lot that's said in the canon about that, but she refers to them as sorcerers. She refers to the Jedi as sorcerers, and I got that tingle that I get when I watch the original trilogy, and he says, you know, we have nothing to say about your old religion or whatever, and then Vader force chokes him. It's really cool that, and it gives you a sense of there being so much else out there in the universe outside of the world of the films, because they don't talk about stuff like this. You don't have these kind of sidebars of like, oh, the Mandalorians believe that, you know, children should be protected, younglings are the future. You get that from these little side stories, and it enriches the universe so much to know that beliefs like this are out there, other than we believe in the Force, light and dark, good versus evil. There's so much more nuance to it, which I really enjoy.
Yeah, and it becomes a theme that you like that echoes across, you know, Star Wars in general. And even at some point in the series, when they witness the Force powers from Baby Yoda, there's only one character who knows what the heck is going on.
Yeah.
And even then, it's like, I've only heard about this. I've never actually seen this happen, but I've heard reports of this kind of a thing. Because I think we get so steeped in Star Wars, you know, culture and excitement, and there's all the prequels, and then there's all the cartoons and stuff that exist, that you forget that, like, by the time you get to Luke Skywalker, like, there are 4: Leia, Luke, Vader, and the Emperor. That's it. Well, yeah. Yoda, 5. But I mean, but all of them are so secluded and so hidden that the rest of the universe has got no idea that the Empire exists. And to most of them, even then, Vader is kind of like a specter. It's not like he's, you know, front and center on every last thing that the Empire does.
He's
right?
like, he's the boogeyman, the guard dog that you don't mess with. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so when you get into stuff like this and they mention like, oh, I've heard of this weird sorcery thing. Like, it's like the in The Force Awakens when they say, like, you know, when Harrison Ford turns around, when Solo turns around and goes, the Jedi are real. Like, I've seen it. Like, it's a real thing. You know, confirming that enough time has passed and enough things have gone on in these outer rims that people don't really remember the Jedi. And I love that by putting this after the Return of the Jedi, even though we all know what happened, it's like you have this epic battle of, magic and sorcery in huge proportions that no one knows about. It's only you, the viewer, that realize how important this is, right? It's very similar to Frodo taking the ring, back to Mordor, right? I mean, you've got this, what people remember is the Battle of Pelennor, not that Frodo, sorry, not people, but viewers remember everything. But the people of the world, only a handful knew about Frodo, right? Because they had to keep it secret. And that was super important. But most of them are just like, we just want to survive the battle. We've got Oliphants, which are essentially Imperial Star Destroyers. Like, we've got all of this stuff in front of us. This is what we have to worry about now. We can't really look outside of this box.
Speaking of Oliphants, there is and Star Destroyers, or in this case, like the ground troop style thing. One of my favorite episodes of The Mandalorian is the one where they take down an AT-ST with help from that kind of community on a sort of tropical, swampy kind of planet, because they're being menaced by Imperials or some rival gang that's managed to get hold of a walker and is basically coming through, demanding stuff from them, shooting up, burning the houses, and so forth. And the Mandalorian and Gina Carano's character, whose name I forget.
She's one of my favorites, and I have it written down here. It's Cara Dune.
Yes, and she's great. But they basically help reinforce this community. And again, it's the cowboy coming into town, helping the locals with what they need, and then strolling off on his horse again. Except he's got a baby with him, apparently. They managed to effectively train this community into taking down an AT-ST, which is really cool. That is one of my favorite moments in it, and there's some really great set pieces in the series as a whole. You've got that episode, you've got the heist crew that double cross him, you've got the last stand in the town on Navarro where everything kind of comes full circle and the Empire really gets in his business and says, no, we are prepared to slaughter everybody in order to get this baby. There's some really great moments in it. But yeah, the AT-ST episode, because it's sort of in the middle of things, they haven't built up to the climax yet, but you're still kind of seeing what he's capable of, but the fact that he needs help from people. He gets help from the other Mandalorians when he's escaping Navarro with the child, and you kind of get the sense that he's very cagey about who he trusts, and he gets double-crossed in this series enough times that you understand why. Yeah. But yeah, there are some really tight moments in that central part of the series before it goes, okay, we have to deal with the overarching plot now.
I think it's also the point where you get the most character development that you've got thus far.
Yeah.
From the Mandalorian, you get to see a softer side of him. It is the introductory episode for Cara Dune, who is badass. I agree. Gina Carano is just phenomenal.
She reminds me of the Space Marine Jane Lynch's character from Wreck-It Ralph. She's kind of got the same armor and everything.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think they do a really good job with her of giving her a badass role to showing off her chops as a great action star. I mean, she's an MMA fighter, but also a good actor. And I think she for whatever reason, I'm not sure like how they managed to subtly swing it, but in other films I've seen her in, she's very much typecast. And I feel like in this, they give her enough dialogue that she has some depth, but she still comes across as like a gruff military kind of like vet, which traditionally goes to usually male roles. And I love the fact that some of the combination of her introduction, the softer moments you get from the Mandalorian character development, in this chapter 4, Sanctuary was directed by Bryce Dallas Howard.
Yes.
Which was fantastic. I love that they gave the introduction of this incredibly cool female Star Wars character to a female director. That is not lost on me. And I think that it's strengthened by it. And I would have loved to have been a fly in the wall for the conversations between Dallas Howard and Carano about the character and how it's going to be revealed and how that their development is going to go. Like I would imagine that there was a lot of excitement around the opportunity to do this.
Yeah.
And I just, the combination of like, you've got Rey from the new Star Wars series, you've got Cara Dune from the Mandalorian, and even some other characters that I wish were still around from Mandalorian, illustrating some strong female roles. Shand from The Gunslinger, played by Ming-Na Wen. She died, and I was mad because like she was an awesome assassin character. Like she plays the role so well. She's a perfect fit for her. Incredibly fun for her, I'm sure, to be in Star Wars, but she's in it for so little time.
Yeah, it's a shame, and you can see why for the structure of that episode it has to happen. But also, I get it, I totally agree with you. The character is really cool, and I feel like the characters are almost competing for space in how cool they are. Even Nick Nolte voicing the character whose name is, I think, Queel or something like that.
Krill,
yeah, something like. Yeah. And he's the kind of I forget what species they are, but he yeah, he's a kind of vapor farmer on the planet that he finds the child on, I think, or at least like he takes the child to him, and like the baby Yoda is placed in his care at various points, and he ends up dying in basically the last episode. He gets shot whilst on the way back to the Mandalorian ship in a really tense sort of chase at the end of episode 7. So 7 and 8 kind of like effectively run into each other as the same episode. But yeah, he's really great as well. Just the recurring catchphrase he has, where he kind of lays down the law, and the Mandalorian looks at him as if he's gonna argue, and then Queel goes, "I have spoken," and that's it. And there's so many good things. There's that, and there is all the Mandalorians chanting, "This is the way." There are so many kind of quotable moments from this for a thing where the main character really doesn't speak all that much either. It's actually really good. A lot of the work is coming from the supporting cast, which is a really great way to build an ensemble show around a solo character, especially if the solo character is known for being the strong silent type.
And it gives you the opportunity for the Mandalorian to recruit Queel and Dune when needed.
Yeah, he's got a squad at the end, basically.
Yeah, but he doesn't need them all the time.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's not the culture of Mandalore. Like, Mandalorians are solo. Like, they're, lone gunmen, essentially.
Yeah.
Work better on their own, sort of thing. I think one of my favorite quotes, I think it's from the first moments of the first episode, is like, you can come in, I can bring you in warm, or I can bring you in cold.
Yeah.
It's like, yes. Very, very cool. I really enjoyed the way that they deliver the humor in the show. They don't smack you over the head with it.
Yeah.
It's very, very subtle, with the exception, I think, of the last episode, and I'll get into that in a second. But I really loved the interaction between the IG-11 bounty hunter droid and the Mandalorian, where the Mandalorian is trying to get something done, but the droid is just so hell-bent on protocol.
And he's very suspicious of droids, and you learn why later in the series.
You learn why, but it's just like he's trying to get the droid to improvise, and the lack of improvisation is creating more chaos in this gun battle. And he's just like, "Will you just stop? Just like it's like the straight man and the I'm trying to remember the name of the other character, but it's similar. You see it in a lot of buddy cop movies, where you've got the rigid rule, play by the book Boy Scout, and then you've got the fly by the seat of your pants hot shot, and they're friends.
You're pairing the lawful good with the chaotic good.
Thank you. Yeah. It's Murtaugh and Riggs from Lethal Weapon. Is essentially what it is.
Absolutely.
Right? And it's very, very funny, but not in a bump. I just made a joke. Did you get the joke? Sort of way. Like, it goes by really quick, and if you're not paying attention, then you miss it. And I really enjoyed that sort of stuff. It's the
amusing.
Baby Yoda humor. Well, I will save Baby Yoda for the end because I don't want to. I'll save that. But yeah, like that kind of stuff is good. So you were going to say about.
I was going to say it's amusing that you've got a character who doesn't want to improvise and one who is the straight man, considering he's voiced by Taika Waititi.
Yes. Yeah. And actually, Taika Waititi is actually the reason why I don't like the last episode. There is a scene with two stormtroopers exploring the fact that they can't hit the broadside of a barn, which has been a thing in Star Wars forever. It's been a long-standing joke.
They make a couple of jokes at the expense of stormtroopers in this series.
Yeah, all of them I think land better with me than this last scene where there's these two guys and they're talking about how defective these little blasters are and they can't shoot a rock or a thing or something from like 4 feet away. And ultimately they're bumbling idiots, but it goes on forever. And
yeah, it's very much like trying to like lose all of the tension so that the rest of the stuff that happens in that episode is like all the more chaotic for it. You have that quiet moment before the storm.
Yeah, but the problem is that the last episode was a cliffhanger where the baby Yoda got snagged by the bad guys, and is, for all intents and purposes, the good guys have lost the item that they've been protecting this entire series, and so you just want to get to the meat of it, and it's just this long thing where like I got the joke the first time, and then they make it like 6 more times, and it's not my style of humor. It's was not surprising when I looked it up. It's like, oh, Taika Waititi directed this episode. Oh crap!
And
I almost wish I hadn't looked it up at
Adam
first.
Pally, and it's somebody else who's like on one of those kind of not quite improvised shows, but it's a show like Always Sunny or something like that, where like he's known for being that sort of character. And again, cool for them that they can make cameos in Star Wars,
but yeah, no, and that's the thing. I didn't like those moments from Ragnarok. I liked Ragnarok as a film overall, but those moments, I was just like, okay, could we just move on? Like, I just don't care. Like, whenever Korg opens up his mouth on Ragnarok, I'm done. I just don't care. And I understand it's me. Like, I understand I just don't like that style of humor. I don't find it funny. And to me, I was like, nah, not in my Star Wars too. But the other thing that I think was a little bit, well, I would say a little bit, it was tedious in episode 8 was Moff Gideon. Not a fan of the casting and the dialogue. For the love of everything, shut up. Like, just stop talking and either be a bad guy or get out of the way. Like,
it almost felt like he was stalling for them at that point, I think, which was weird.
So dumb. Like, you have until the end of the day. No, Empire gives you until the end of the day. Like, you give me the thing now or die. Like, that's how it works. Anyway, I'm sorry I'm yelling because this is the thing that I really got bugged by at the end of the series. And I mean, there were some redeeming moments from the character in terms of bits. Like, he comes out of a wrecked TIE fighter at the end with a dark lightsaber.
Yeah, he has a dark saber, doesn't he? Yes, I forgot about that.
So this is a tie into Rebels, and the Clone Wars. So the dark saber, as explained in the Rebels series, you get the backstory of it there, which is great. The one of the Mandalorian was inducted into the Jedi Order, and he constructed this dark saber, and then returned to Mandalore to unite the clans and create this Mandalorian the way. Like, so he is the kind of like the pioneer of this Mandalorian culture by uniting a planet or a race of people or a broken set of factions to then unite. And as a symbol, it's not like the sword has any special powers, but as a symbol, usually the leader of Mandalore possesses the blade.
Right.
Usually received in combat by defeating the person that has it. So if you want to take over Mandalore as the ruler and you defeat them, then you have the battle, or you have the sword. And in Star Wars history, the Empire ransacks Mandalore. I don't remember the name of the battle. I think it's just the Battle of Mandalore. But we've not seen it. We've heard about it in Star Wars canon, but we've never seen it before. And so Moff Gideon seems to be the person or the Imperial leader that was probably responsible or at the helm of the Battle of Mandalore, and so thus has the dark saber. To me, provided that I'm absolutely positive there will be another season of The Mandalorian. I'm sure they've had it announced. I just don't remember the dates. That then becomes, I would imagine, the thing that the Mandalorian is going to be trying to get. Like in addition to keeping Baby Yoda safe, he's also going to want to get that dark saber back from Gideon. Yeah. The problem is I really don't like Gideon.
Yeah,
I don't want more of him in the show.
I think it's an interesting move because the Empire, as you've pointed out, I think in previous podcasts, is known for being kind of racist. You were talking about this in the episode where you're talking about Thrawn's inclusion in Rebels or Clone Wars, whichever series. I don't actually watch either of those, and I really should.
Oh, you should.
Once Disney Plus rolls around. But yeah, I find it interesting that they're casting Giancarlo Esposito as Moff Gideon because, he's a black guy. He's like half Italian, half African American, I believe. And it's interesting that they've got him in the role. I agree that, like I said, it sort of seems like he is stalling for them in a way, but I don't know. I'm waiting to see what else they do because he's really only introduced in that last little fragment of the series, and
Yeah.
maybe if he becomes a more kind of firmed up big bad over time, which you presume he will be, if he's responsible for the fall of Mandalore, then the Mandalorian has beef with him, sword or no, like he's clearly, the one responsible for the downfall of this guy's entire, family, or whatever the Mandalorians would call themselves.
Yes.
I think it's neat that you've set that up at the end of this series. I think the short series really leaves you wanting more as well, because there's only 8 episodes. It's a relatively short format. It's not like Game of Thrones where there's, hour-long episodes plus. And so I really wanted more from The Mandalorian, which is a good thing, because I didn't want more of The Rise of Skywalker. So it's, I think a really, really strong outing for The Mandalorian.
Yeah. Speaking of a strong outing, I think that's probably where I'm going to call it a show for this episode of the Citadel Cafe. Johnny and I are going to keep on talking because I've got some baby Yoda thoughts that I think people will want to hear. But you can get that over at patreon.com/the Citadel Cafe. You can get more info about this show and links to some of the things that Johnny and I talked about today at thecitadelcafe.com. Music for the show was composed, sadly, not by John Williams, but by Kevin MacLeod. The email for the show is thecitadelcafe@gmail.com. You can find us by name on Twitter and Facebook. Subscribe on iTunes, Android, Stitcher, and Spotify. But word of mouth is the easiest way to support the show. Just poke a friend in the arm and say, hey, they talked about Star Wars. You should go listen to this. Even if you didn't like the movie, you might actually agree with these two jokers. My name is Joel Duggan. You can find everything I am doing online, including my illustration and design portfolio at joelduggan.com. If you're interested in hiring me, then just drop me a line there. Check out my other podcast about Minecraft with this guy, Johnny, thespongechunks.com. We do that every Monday. So we'll be doing a new episode in the next few days, which is going to be great. You can find me on social media with just my name. It's very easy to find, as well as, of course, twitch.tv/Joel Duggan, where I'm doing all kinds of creative and fun video game stuff. Johnny, I'll have the links in the show notes, but where can people find all the stuff that you're doing online?
Everything I do online is mostly under my name, Pixlriffs, Pixlriffs. You can find me on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, and Instagram under that name. If you want to see more of Joel's illustration portfolio, head over to my Twitch and check out the emotes. They are all very, very good, and hopefully there are more to come. But lately, I've been hanging my hat on YouTube, where I have a series called the Minecraft Survival Guide and a new series of Minecraft Skyblock, where I try and explore some of the technical side of Minecraft in a world that has basically no terrain. It is an open void, and you have to rely on stuff that you can get renewably, which is a lot of fun. I know Joel has been playing the same on his Twitch, so all the more reason to cross-pollinate and check us both out.
You've been listening to the Citadel Cafe, where we are fast, easy, and cheap.
But always two there are.